And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Okay, once again, NOAA Weather Radio outage. When? 2 p.m. Friday to August 25th through 5 p.m. Monday, August 28th. And which stations will be out? Utagavik, Kotzebue, Nome, Bethel, St. Paul, Unalaska, Cold Bay, and Yakutat. But weather forecasts and warnings as well as tsunami information will continue to be available at weather.gov and tsunami.gov. Up first here, the ice analysis. Just about all of the Arctic coast now sea ice free, except for a stretch here near the Barren Island, or near the Barrier Islands there on the east side. Otherwise, that's about it. And so going from there for tonight, low pressure slowly weakening, moving northward across the western interior. Rain and showers covering much of the central and western interior. This weakening front doesn't really bring much north of the Alaska Range in the way of precipitation, but it will be quite a wind producer for the eastern Alaska Range with 40 to 50 mile an hour wind gusts out of the south. Rain for the Copper River Basin, rain becoming more showery and tapering off south central Alaska, and stays dry over the Panhandle. Again tomorrow, highs in the 70s with some sunshine there for the southeast coast. And rain here, this front kind of oscillating a little bit, keeps periods of rain for the Kenai Peninsula, North Gulf Coast, and the Copper River Basin. Not as much rain tomorrow for south central Alaska. Cook Inlet, Susitna Valley is what was seen the last 24 hours, but still on the wet side. Breaking out here for Bristol Bay, wet over the western part of the state, all the way up to the Arctic coast. Next system bringing some rain and a little bit of an increase in the winds here to the central Aleutians. And that gradient tightens up even further here as a new low develops and pulls to just south of Atka Island. So increasing wind and rain trying to push into the eastern Aleutians. High pressure dries it out with some sunshine over the eastern Bering Sea, Alaska Peninsula, and the western interior a little bit. But this system coming northward pushes a warm front with warm front rains in across southern Alaska once again. Again, much lighter and more intermittent, scattered over the Copper River Basin, and eastern interior basically dry, showers over the Brooks Range, and dry for the north slope and the Arctic coast. Panhandle, mostly sunny skies, especially south with highs in the 60s and 70s. For the south coast of the Panhandle, north winds 10 to 15 knots for the day on Sunday. Northwest on the central coast at about 15, and the north coast, south to southeast, 10 to 15 knots. Light variable winds at 10 knots, or 5 to 10 knots there for the inside waters. And then for Monday, Lynn Canal, south at 15 knots, Stevens Passage, south at 10, northwest at 10 for Clarence Strait. South coast, north winds 10 knots. Central coast, northwest, 10 to 15 knots, and southwest to northwest at 10 knots for the north coast. Prince William Sound tomorrow, southeast winds 20 knots, seas 4 feet. And the eastern North Gulf Coast, southeast winds 15 knots, 6 to 7 foot seas, south at 15 for the western North Gulf Coast. Cook Inlet, small craft advisory, south winds 25 knots, seas up to 7 feet. Kamishak Bay and the Barrens, south winds at 20 with 5 foot seas. And then for Monday, Cook Inlet, north to northeast winds 15 to 20 knots, north 20 for the Kamishak Bay, northeast at 20 here for the Barren Islands. And variable winds 10 to 15 knots for the North Gulf Coast, and a light southeast wind at 10 knots for Prince William Sound. Kodiak Island, southwest winds at 20 for the day Sunday. West-northwest 15 to 20 for the Alaska Peninsula. Bristol Bay, west winds at 20 knots, seas 5 feet. Kodiak Island on Monday, northeast at 20 knots, north at 20 for Bristol Bay. Alaska Peninsula, variable winds 10 to 15 knots here with seas running 2 to 3 feet. Eastern Aleutians, south winds for Unimak Island at 15 knots, northwest 15 for Unalaska Island, variable at 20 for Adak and Atka. And small craft advisories west of Adak all the way out to Shemya, south winds 25 to 30 knots. And for Monday, west of Adak to Shemya, west northwesterlies 15 knots. East winds at 30 knots, though, for Adak and Atka. And small craft advisories now for the eastern Aleutians for east to southeast winds at 25 to 30 knots. For the southwest coast, tomorrow, north of Nunivak Island, small craft advisories here for northwest winds at 25 knots, northwest 25 also for St. Lawrence Island, north at 25 for Norton Sound. Kuskokwim Delta coast, west at 20 knots. St. Matthew, St. Paul, St. George Island, west winds at 15. East winds 20 knots for the Pribilofs on Monday. East 20 for St. Matthew Island as well. And light variable winds 5 to 10 knots for the Yukon Delta coast, St. Lawrence Island, and Norton Sound. And northeast at about 10 for the Kuskokwim Delta coast. And for the Chukchi Sea tomorrow, small craft advisories. North winds 25 knots, seas 5 to 8 feet. Western Arctic coast, we've got west winds at about 20 knots, north winds at 20 knots on the western coast, and then west at 15 for the central and eastern coast, turning south at 15 for Kaktovik Barter Island area. And then small craft advisories for the central and western Arctic coast. There are west winds up to 25, in some cases 30 knots toward demarcation point, and west at 20 for the western Arctic coast. Lighter winds now for the Chukchi Sea from the south and southwest at 10 to 15.